Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This episode is brought to you by Audible, the world's leading name in digital audiobooks. Nanette Johnston Packard, a sexy divorcee, liked to meet men at the gym and through personal ads. Soon after she began dating millionaire Bill McLaughlin, he moved her and her kids into his bayfront home in Newport Beach. But one man was never enough for Nanette. Eric Naposki, her NFL linebacker lover, fulfilled Nanette's wilder cravings. Together they schemed to make her fiance's fortune their own. When McLaughlin was gunned down, authorities had suspicions, but no proof. Pulitzer-nominated writer Caitlin Rother explores this chilling story of a woman who seemed to have it all until justice finally had its day. The book we're profiling this evening is I'll Take Care of You, with my special guest, journalist and author, Caitlin Rother. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Caitlin Rother.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on again. It's always fun.
It's always my pleasure, and our audience as well. Now, let's get to this, my typical question. Without giving too much away, why were you interested in this story, and how did you come to write this book, I'll Take Care of You?
Well, this book actually came out of another book that I wrote a few books ago called Dead Reckoning. The same police department, the same prosecutor, and actually one of the same defense attorneys were all involved in this previous case. Same DA investigator as well who took it up as a cold case. But I was working on the other book, which came out some years ago, and the detective sergeant that I had been working with, getting information from and following along and calling and nagging him for various things, he said, yeah, I'm actually working on this arrest warrant. We're going to go after this woman. She was a piece of work. And I said, oh, tell me about this case. So it ended up being this case, which was a cold case by then. It took 15 years for Nanette and her linebacker lover, Eric Naposki, to be arrested for the murder of Bill McLaughlin. But it was just interesting that I was able to follow it from the beginning of this second phase and all the way through to trials and sentencings and what have you, and was able to work with some of the same people on this other book. So very different, though, in terms of the way that they handled the investigation. So the Dead Reckoning was the Skylar DeLeon case, and they handled that one beautifully. This one did not go so well in the first stage of the investigation, in the initial stage of it.
Yes, I interviewed you about Dead Reckoning a few years ago, so you've been out about 3 or 4 times now with your projects. Yeah,
right.
So, yeah.
But actually, if I could just add a little bit. But the thing that actually grabbed me more currently and in a more timely way was I was drawn to this case not just because I knew some of the characters, but because I really feel like money corrupts. And this case drew me for some of the same reasons that the other case did, for the greed and the materialism that you see, portrayed in shows like The Real Housewives of Orange County and The OC, which was a show that was on TV some years ago. But just the way that people seem to think that, money and appearances are so important, that's one of the more thematic reasons that this case really, really drew me in, because I feel like that's one of our major problems in our society today and in our culture, of how much importance people put on money and appearances. And, that leads to some people stealing from other people and committing fraud and having so much cosmetic surgery that you can't even recognize them anymore. So those were a couple of the things that Nanette ended up doing.
Right. Well, let's get to that right now. Because I got to congratulate you on a very, very vivid portrayal of these characters. So let's start with the most colorful character, I think, is Nanette Johnston Packard, and she has various names along the way because she ends up marrying
right.
4 times. So tell us about
3
Nanette.
times, but yeah, she didn't take her third husband's name.
Okay, but tell us about Nanette, and a little, as much as you explain in the book, tell us about Nanette.
Well, that's a very complicated question. I could probably take half an hour to answer. I'll try to keep it short. But she was a very different kind of person from whom I've written about before. So I was also drawn to this case for that reason. I like to have a different, even though there's so many murders out there are only so many murders that are interesting to me and that are worth the book. And this woman, the more that I got into this case, the more I just could not believe just how extreme she was. She was an extreme liar and an extreme cheat and a fraud, and she was incredibly sexual and manipulative and seductive. And I just kept thinking to myself, what is it about her that drew in so many of these men? And what can people learn from this book? Because I don't want to just, I'm not writing books about murders to sensationalize violence. I am writing about murder to try to figure out what makes people do these things to other people. What is it about them? What happened to them? Was there anything in their background as a child? And I was not really able to pin that down with her because she was so good at creating these different, faces for herself that it was difficult. So I did end up getting some answers from her third husband who, got close to her. And I think actually may be the only husband, if, other than maybe her first husband when she was still 17 when she first got married. Her third husband, it sounds to me like she really fell in love with him. But he ended up finding out a few things about her, but he still didn't know who she really was. And that was who Nanette was, somebody who was different to everybody she met. She lied about who she was. She adopted other people's successes as her own. She told people that she was someone she wasn't, and she had cosmetic surgery to make herself into something she wanted to be. And frankly, I don't know even what that was, other than she wanted to paint herself as, as some of these reality stars do. I have money, I'm pretty, I have a lot of men, very narcissistic, wanted so many clothes that, her entire closet was full of clothes. In fact, many of them still had price tags on them. So it was like she needed to surround herself with expensive things to make herself feel worthy. And yet at the same time, she also was I don't know if this is, if she was pretending to be a super mom or really felt like she was a super mom, but she attended every sports game of her sons and every dance recital for her daughter. She brought her kids cupcakes on their birthday, even when they were in college. And she was, doing some of these things, dating all these men and getting money and spending money, other people's money, on her kids. So maybe they thought she was a great mom, too. I don't really know, but she used this mom thing to draw in these men to make them feel like they were part of a family, and that was one of her manipulative mechanisms. So in the end, though, what my theory was that Nanette really just wanted to be somebody other than herself. I told you it was a long answer.
Yeah, that's not so long. Now, we'll get to the beginning of this story then, and we'll talk about how she puts an ad in a magazine. A lot of people would be online, but she puts an ad in a magazine for wealthy men, and tell us what that ad was.
Well, you have to remember this was 1994, so this was before the days of online dating. So today she probably would have done, Match.com or something. But
exactly.
Although, to be honest, Match.com doesn't allow you to look for wealthy men only, although I guess you could put that in your profile. But anyway, she advertised in a singles magazine called Singles Connection. And she said, for wealthy men only, that was the title of the ad. She dressed up in this white feather boa and had on this little come-hither outfit, frou-frou hair. It was a boudoir shot, essentially, but head and shoulders. And she basically said, I'll take care of you if you take care of me. And so she pretty much came out and said it. So Bill McLaughlin answered this ad. And the police know this because they found a stack of notes back and forth, presumably because they were cards in a stack, and Bill was very meticulous, and so he had a stack of them, and the earliest one was at the bottom, which was the first one, and it was addressed to him in the mail. So it's clear that, you know, he was answering her ad because his kids did not want to believe that their dad would have answered a personal ad, but there was proof that he did mail this thing to her. Anyway, so she, you know, pretty much gave her measurements and height and said a bunch of stuff that really ends up not being true. I don't know. When she met him, she told him she had an advanced college degree, when in fact, you know, and she graduated high school early. She was a valedictorian. She had finished college earlier than, you know, the 4 years, and she had an advanced business degree. Well, in fact, she dropped out of high school, and she was not valedictorian. She went to work at a gym, and she was really good at sales, and so she got promoted quickly, but all of this stuff about her education was completely made up. So he moved her into his house pretty quickly, and they got along great. And, you know, he told his cousin, Barbara, who I quote in the book, you know, I really met this, you know, pretty lady, and I really like her a lot, and we get along really well, and da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, she weaseled her way into the house and eventually into his checkbook. So
now let's go backwards a little bit. So let's introduce Mr. McLaughlin, William Francis McLaughlin, and the age difference. In 1994, she was 29, he was 55. So a few years earlier, 3 years earlier, she's 26, he's 52.
Yeah,
so double the age.
Right. Sounds right.
So
he
because
was newly divorced. He had 3 grown kids. His youngest son was, I think, 19 at the time when they met, and he had 2 daughters, and one was in Japan teaching, and the other one was teaching at a high school nearby. And he had, you know, thought he was done with being a dad, essentially, but his son ended up getting into a skateboarding accident, meaning that a drunk driver, you know, ran him over. He had this horrible brain injury. He was in a coma. They weren't sure he was going to come back. So when he came out of it, he had some deficiencies, and one of them was that he, you know, when he got upset or when he got very anxious, when he tried to talk, he sounded like he was drunk. So it was hard to understand him. He was kind of slurry. And he wasn't able to walk as well. He wasn't as athletic, obviously, as he used to be, and he still had a hard time writing as well. So anyway, he was working on that with the therapy, and he was living in the house. And he's very frustrated, so he was actually using drugs and drinking more than his dad appreciated. So, you know, he's like, you need to get into AA, and he made him sign a contract, and he had some drug testing kits in the refrigerator. And meanwhile, Nanette was living with both of them in the house, and she had her 2 kids would come and stay because she shared custody, and they moved into Bill's daughter's room pretty quickly, and so the older Bill's daughters were a little taken aback by that. Wow, we barely left, and she's just moved in and moved her kids in, and wow.
Right.
So they were not thrilled with her. He thought she was, you know, the greatest thing. You know, he was having a good time with her, clearly. He was also a very bright man, a very educated man, and he was a wealthy man because he had invented a medical device that separated plasma from blood. He invented this with a partner and then subsequently got into this major legal battle with this partner. And so there were royalties that had been coming in to the tune of a couple million a year. And then once this lawsuit kept going and going and going, it was very extensive, very frustrating for him. They put some of those royalties into a fund that he did not have access to while they were in the middle of this lawsuit. So he was wealthy, but there was a bunch of money that he didn't have access to. So meanwhile, he and Nanette were working on a number of different projects, real estate projects, various other things that he was trying to do with some related technology to the blood device. So he was busy working away, but he was struggling financially in the last year of his life. So things were kind of iffy with his finances, but she had some plans to change that.
Now, you paint this portrayal of these people, but what did really Nanette look like in comparison, we'll say, to this educated Bill McLaughlin, rich guy? He got out of a nasty divorce, so he was very interested in this woman, was what he thought was injecting some real, some happiness in his life for a change.
Yeah.
So tell us, what did she look like? What did he look like? And what did the relationship just look like from outsiders, friends of Bill, we'll say? What did it look like?
How did she look physically?
Yeah, physically and sort of just in terms of they went out with people. What did it seem like the couple was like? The dynamic of the couple.
Right. Okay. She was of Indian, as in from India descent, not Native American, and so her father was Indian. Her mother was from the Chicago area, so she was half white and half Indian. So she had a different kind of look about her, but you wouldn't know from looking at her that she was of Indian descent. So she had dark eyes. She had dark, really kinky, curly, kind of frizzy hair, and she started coloring it, and it also looked like it was sun bleached. So it's kind of hard to tell, what was the sun and what was the hair color. But she was almost blonde. Which, for somebody with Indian descent, you can imagine they're dark hair, dark eyes, and a different tint to the skin. So I saw her in court, and she didn't really look olive-skinned, but she definitely didn't look completely white. So anyway, she was attractive at the time. She was very athletic, very much in shape, went to the gym all the time, and apparently dressed to the nines. So she was very well dressed, and that's partly because Bill was buying her stuff. Bill was, bought her some breast implants. Bill took her on vacations. Bill said she didn't have to work as long as she was living in the house because he was going to take care of her. I mean, that was the deal, right? So she had plenty of time to work on her appearance. Bill, on the other hand, he was also athletic. He did manage to keep himself in good shape. He was a decent-looking guy. I wouldn't say he was a gorgeous man, but, he was not bad-looking. But he wasn't young. He had money, but he was in good shape, and he did work at it. And apparently he would. I don't think he dressed up a lot, but they had a nice place on the beach, and they would go out. He would bring her on business dinners, which was something I guess his ex-wife didn't really like to do, and she didn't enjoy the business aspect of it, and Nanette really did. Nanette was trying to soak up every little piece of information that she could from Bill and learn from him, and I think he enjoyed that. I think he enjoyed that she was engaged in his life in a way that his ex-wife had not been. And so by all appearances, Bill's friends all thought they were this, I wouldn't say loving couple, but exclusive couple. They got along well. He was affectionate with her. He was very affectionate with his kids. There's all kinds of snapshots of him, cuddling with her kids on the couch, taking them on his private plane, and taking them on his private boat. So she's living the high life, and it seems like everything's great. But he also is spending a couple days a week in Las Vegas. He flies there in his private plane because he is establishing residency for tax purposes. He's saving $500,000 a year doing this. Now, while he's away in Las Vegas, she's at the gym, supposedly staying in shape. She is not taking her big diamond engagement ring with her to the gym. She is going to the gym posing as a young, hot, single, athletic woman on the prowl, and she is meeting and dating men left and right and sleeping with them, in fact, sleeping with them in Bill McLaughlin's house while he is in Las Vegas, which takes so much chutzpah, I can't even tell you.
Now, why would she do that? Did she what is the motivation you believe at that time? Did she not understand what the ramifications could be if she were caught, or was it more of a sexual drive? What would you attribute it to?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I'm not sure I want to assume anything. I can speculate. I think she was very sexually driven. I do know that. I can say that for sure. I think she just thought she was so damn clever. She was going to fool everybody, and she was going to get what she wanted and what she needed, and nobody was going to figure it out. Because, that seems to be a pattern with these narcissistic killers, that, I'm smarter than everybody else, and I'm going to get away with this because I'm so good at this. I'm so good at lying. I fool everyone, and everyone believes me, and they'll just do what I want, and I just manipulate them. And I want these men to give me sex, and I want these men to think that I'm a successful businesswoman, and that this car that Bill gave me, and these clothes that Bill bought me, and these other things that Bill gave me, including his own accomplishments, which she took as her own, and told stories that she had invented this blood device, which is just ridiculous considering how old she was and what her education truly was. These people believed her, and they wanted to meet Bill. They wanted to meet Bill because she told them that Bill was her, father figure, business mentor, and they were thinking, hey, some of them, hey, I can get some of his money and invest it in my business. So they were believing her stories, and so she was basically getting the admiration and the respect and the sex and the nice things from every direction. So she was getting what she wanted, and she was pretending to be who she wanted to be, and she was getting away with it. So motivation, I think she had a big, deep, black hole in her soul that she was trying to fill with this cash and with this sex. And I don't know why she had it or where it came from, but it seems like she definitely had a big black hole in her soul.
They were together 3 years approximately. Now, at what point does she's always going to the gym, she's always working out. When does she meet Eric Naposki? And please tell us about Eric Naposki.
Eric Naposki and Nanette meet actually a couple years before Bill is murdered. So they meet as friends at the gym. He's a guy who's an NFL, wannabe, essentially. He has played 5 games in the NFL, and he keeps getting injured. So he gets a walk-on with the New England Patriots. He auditions and he makes it by crawling through a hole in the fence and, running really fast and getting some notice. And so he was a great athlete, really great athlete, just kept getting injured. So he could never make it in the NFL. He did actually do well in the World Football League. So he was on a team in Barcelona called the Barcelona Dragons. He actually had his own fan club with 5,000 fans. But he just could not make it here in the U.S. And so in between, healing and, getting injured and healing and training and running off and trying to audition again and getting signed and then injured, back and forth, he was a bouncer and a physical trainer. And so while he was, in the Newport Beach area, he met Nanette at the gym. They started hanging out. And I guess they were friends, so she would tell him that she was dating all these different guys, and he didn't really know much about Bill McLaughlin, but she never told anybody at the gym that she was engaged to Bill McLaughlin. She made everybody think that he was just a business partner. So Eric Naposki, he had been married and divorced, had 2 kids, and he never sent them any money. He was always behind in his child support, as it turns out. By the time he was ultimately arrested in 2009, he was about $100,000 behind because he had been married again with 2 more kids. So 4 kids, never paying his child support. He was $100,000 in debt. But at this time, this was only after 2 kids. So he's a dad. He's telling Nanette he's a dad, and he gets, I think, sucked in a little bit too because he apparently likes kids. And he's hanging out with Nanette's kids. And, by the year of 1994, they were dating. So they decided to try to date. So they'd been friends already for a year or 2 and started dating. And initially, it wasn't an exclusive thing, but they were getting more serious. or at least Eric thought so, and he took her home to meet his parents in Thanksgiving of 1994, and Nanette took him to her sister's wedding, that same trip back east down in the Maryland area, and introduced him as her boyfriend. Meanwhile, Bill McLaughlin is thinking they're engaged, right? Now, Bill was telling some people that he wasn't sure he wanted to marry her. He was just trying to keep her happy with this ring. And things were starting to go a little funny, and it's unclear whether he was figuring anything out or not, but he did tell his brother right before he was killed that he thought someone was after him, and he didn't say who.
Well,
I don't remember what your question was, but there you go. Oh, Eric.
No, that was great. No, that was great. I mean, it covers a lot of things I would have asked. Now, you say that they were Nanette and Bill had her involved in some things, trying to generate some income and utilize whatever talents he thought that she might have, or she conveyed to him that she did.
I wouldn't say it was for that reason. I would say that she was trying to soak up whatever he was doing, and so she was more in a support capacity, I think, at that point. Just to clarify.
But I want to establish how she came to have. I mean, he must have had someone like a brother or someone to advise him that, you don't really, or at least he would know himself, being a businessman himself, that not to give her access to his money. How does she come to have access to be able to do some things?
Here's the problem. You're applying rationality to a sexual situation.
Yeah, of course.
So, no, I totally agree with you. You would think, and everybody wondered afterwards, Bill was a smart man. What happened here, right? Well, he gave her access to his checkbook for the household bills. So he gave her access to one account, okay? Mm-hmm. And I guess he just didn't think that she was a bad person that was going to take that, liberty to start moving money around between other accounts. So one thing he did do is he talked to his accountant who, basically he said, Nanette wants to get married, what should I do? And the accountant basically said, well, why don't you just wait? It's not going anywhere. If she really wants to marry you, she'll still want to marry you. And because, he was having some difficulties. And at one point, actually, in 1994, as things were getting very tight and he was having some liquidity problems, he even said to his daughters, do you think she's with me for my money? And they said yes. And so, it's hard to say exactly, but I think she must have just told him what he wanted to hear, and I think he trusted her. So all she had access to was one account, and what she ended up doing, though, was like I said, soaking up all this knowledge, and he did make her a trustee to his estate. That's if he were dead. Of course, when he did that, they were engaged, and she kept saying she wanted to have his child, and he thought they were going to build a life together. At least that's what she wanted. I don't know that he wanted that necessarily, but I think he was just trying to get back on afloat because this lawsuit had been dragging on, and then finally, in October of 1994, and he was murdered in December, he finally got word that he had won, or at least, had won that round, and so he and Nanette were thinking that about $9 million was about to come floating in. So things suddenly changed in October of 1994.
Right. Now, was there she's living with her two kids, he has kids, Bill has friends. I mean, she's in a gym. I mean, is there anybody trying to intervene on Bill's behalf, warning him, or any rumors floating around? Is there any doubt? Is there anybody that's speaking out against her?
Well, I think Bill was pretty headstrong, from what I understand. Bill was pretty headstrong, and you did not tell Bill what to do. And you did not tell Bill how things were going to be. Bill told you how things were going to be. And so Pan, his other daughter, was living on her own elsewhere. So the only person who was living with him was his son, who he was having some issues with because of his drug and alcohol use. So he was still in a father-son situation with him. I don't think Kevin was saying anything to his dad like, watch out for Nanette. And in fact, I don't think they had any idea of what she was capable of. That's the thing. So when she's running around with Eric Naposki and all these other men, they didn't know that. They thought they were in an exclusive relationship because Nanette was savvy enough to figure out that, Bill did not want to come to these sporting events with her because he told her that. He goes, you know what, I already raised my kids. I don't have any interest in coming to these, baseball games with you. So she would bring her lovers, and Eric Naposki in particular, to these games. So the other people on the teams could see them. In fact, she's sitting on Eric Naposki's lap right up until the day of the murder in front of her first ex-husband. But again, she's telling everybody else that, hey, Bill McLaughlin is my, business mentor, father figure, including her first ex-husband. The only person that testified during the trial that said anything that he knew was some guy who was a father of one of the kids on Nanette's son's baseball team who actually knew that she was living with Bill. He was the only person, and he didn't say anything because he didn't like Bill personally. In fact, he liked Eric Naposki better because so there was nobody to warn Bill because she kept everybody separate and compartmentalized. That she was very good at that.
Now let's get to, some particulars of this, and without giving anything away. She has this checkbook. She has the ability to write a check, $1,000, $10,000. You can tell our audience how much to write that check for, but hang on. Then we want to know. You should outline where Eric Naposki works and its proximity to their home, and the soccer game. We're going to talk about the soccer game, which is an hour before or earlier in the evening, and Eric and Nanette and the boy is going to receive an award. So this is an amazing part of this book where this incredible scene. So tell us first about this check and how much and when is it written out for, and tell us about that first.
Okay. So all through 1994, Nanette is getting more and more brazen with this. Basically, what she's doing is embezzling money. So first she's starting out with just taking $1,000 and making it $5,000. So she's moving money basically from account to account. So she only has authorized access to one account, but she's moving stuff around, and she keeps a ledger. And so she's entering in. She'll take a certain amount of money, and she'll enter in a different amount of money. So she's taking money, and then and since she's doing the accounting, she's not doing the proper accounting either. So she can take it, no one will notice. At least she thinks so. And that's true for all of 1994. Then she starts getting a little more brazen. So as 1994 progresses and her relationship with Eric progresses, she starts taking bigger amounts of money and, again, entering in a different amount in the ledger and moving money around different accounts so that you can't find it if it's missing, right? So all the way up to, it starts getting to $30,000 and $75,000, and then on December 14th, which is the day before he's murdered, she writes a check for $250,000. Wow. She signs it Bill McLaughlin. So she's forging his signature, and it is made out to a trust that she has just established in the last couple of weeks. As soon as she found out this $9 million was going to be coming in, she immediately establishes this new business and a new account, incorporates this new thing, and she's basically setting up a mechanism to take the rest of his money, and obviously to kill him, because all of this is done in such a way that the timing is such that he would have found out that she was doing this. And so the detectives and the prosecution think that either he was about to find out or the clock was ticking, something was about to happen. Maybe he really was having suspicions. We don't really know. His brother said that there was a very strange phone call right before he was killed where he said that he was stockpiling guns and someone was after him, and he was, he was sounding really paranoid and strange. So, but he didn't mention Nanette. It's something, he knew something was going on. Meanwhile, Nanette has just gotten back from this, whirlwind trip back to meet Eric's parents, and from her sister's wedding where he caught the garter belt and she caught the bouquet, and they're sitting in each other's lap, and all these pictures of them. Clearly this happy couple. This is a couple weeks before Bill is killed, right?
Sure.
So, and I don't know what she's thinking, that nobody's ever going to notice, nobody's ever going to find these pictures, nobody's ever going to find out. I don't know what she was thinking, but anyway. So she and Eric go off to this championship soccer game for her son, Christopher. And, as I said, she has gone to every single game. She is the super soccer mom. She drives all the kids. She's always there. Except on this night, her first ex-husband is there. He's the father of her two kids. He's there. Eric is there. He thinks that Eric and Nanette are a couple, but he knows Nanette's ways because she cheated on him too. And he's thinking, you know what, she's involved with Bill and Eric. But he doesn't say anything. So he sees them, and about 8:20 p.m., they start saying, we got to go. Eric's got an 8 o'clock appointment. He's like, well, but it's 8:20 and they're in overtime, and it's a tied game. Where are you going? So anyway, the kid loses, and there's a championship medal ceremony. So even though he lost, there's still a medal ceremony. It's like it's not a trophy, but it's a medal. So it's still something. And if you're a great mom, aren't you going to stay and watch your kid get the medal? Because he did make it into the championships. Oh, no, she's got to leave with Eric. So they're running off to the car, and her first husband thinks that's pretty weird. Anyway, they disappear, and Eric, about 2 weeks earlier, coincidentally, has gotten this new job as a security guy at this new nightclub, which is only about a 2.5-minute walk from Bill's house. So it's called the Lido, I think it's the Lido Village area. And it's over a bridge, over some water from Bill's house, which is right on the water. And coincidentally, two weeks earlier, he gets this job. So Nanette and Eric tell police later that when they're questioned that, hey, she dropped him off at his apartment and he took a shower and then he went to work. And she went shopping. She went to the mall because it was right before Christmas. She had some shopping to do. So she comes back to Bill's house with these shopping bags and a receipt to show where she's been. And Eric, when they finally catch up to him, he says, that was his story. So I'll stop there.
Now, tell us about the murder in itself. Bill is home in his robe, and he's just got back from Vegas in his private plane. His son, the somewhat mentally disabled son, is upstairs listening to some music. Right. And what happens?
So Bill comes back, and normally on a Thursday night, Kevin is at an AA meeting. And so on this particular night, though, he did not go, and it's not really clear why. But he stayed home, and he and his dad had some dinner, and then he went upstairs to listen to music. And around 9:10 p.m., he starts hearing these shots downstairs. Pop, pop, and then there's a pause. Pop, pop, and then there's a pause. Pop, pop, and then there's a pause. So he comes downstairs as fast as he can, and as I mentioned before, he has some ambulatory problems from his brain damage. So it takes him a full minute to get downstairs, and this dog is barking like crazy. And he finds his father lying on the kitchen floor, and there's blood on the floor. There's some bullet casings lying around. The dog is barking like crazy. His father's glasses are askew. Yeah, and he's in his bathrobe, and so he immediately starts calling 911. And the tragic, horrible part of this case, and they played the 911 tape in the courtroom, and it just made you wrench inside. It was so sad. He was trying so hard to communicate with the 911 dispatcher, and she could not understand what he was saying. And it was just, it must have just been horrible for him. So trying to communicate, having such problems communicating. She's like, wait, what, your dog's been shot? You know, wait, did your father shoot himself? Your mom, your dad? I mean, she just couldn't get it. But she did get that there was a gun involved. So they did end up sending an ambulance. They did send the police over, but by the time they got over there, it was way too late. And in fact, by the time he was calling 911, his father was probably already dead because there were 6 shots with the 9mm. And there were at least several of them that would have been fatal as soon as they were shot. So he probably felt like, time was running out, but in fact his dad was already dead.
Now, when police come, as I spoke about at the beginning, what do they find in the door, and what do they find in the ground near the door? Well, they don't find it immediately, but tell us what they find and tell us about that.
Right. Okay. So Kevin comes downstairs and he finds his dad. He calls 911. When the police arrive, they show up, and the first police who show up are actually on bikes because this is Newport Beach. There's a lot of water in Newport Beach, and a lot of there's a pedestrian. It's kind of like a jogging path, or you can walk on it, you can bike on it, you can rollerblade on it, and that goes all the way around the peninsula area, and right where Bill lived, which was called Bay. Oh my God, I hope I don't get this wrong. Bayshore Coves. Nanette was a rollerblader and very athletic, as I said. And so the people in the house who lived there had a key to a gate that went from inside the community out to that path. So there was a gate right across the street. They lived on a cul-de-sac. And then they also had front door keys. So the pedestrian access gate, keys for that lock were given out to by the homeowners association. There were only a limited number. You had to sign out for them. You were not allowed to copy the key. It said do not copy on keys. So they were distributed by the homeowners association on purpose to keep it secure. So anyway, when the police got there, they found 2 newly copied keys. One was actually literally in the door lock of the front door, just a single key, with one of those little tiny metal circles that you get when you just come back from the hardware store, because they give you those little tiny key ring things. And then there was another one on the doormat, and they were different colors, and they were clearly, shiny, brand new copied keys. Now, as they started doing some investigation, what they found was that, because they were right near the ocean, the front door lock could get corroded with salt, so that sometimes when they had a new key, they'd have to go get it reground because it wouldn't fit in properly. And then the one that was on the doormat was the one that went to the gate, the pedestrian access gate out to that path. And by the way, that path led right up to the bridge, which led across the bridge over to the Thunderbird Lounge where Eric Naposki had just gotten this job. So, again, there was a key to the pedestrian access gate on the mat, and the front door lock had a key that was literally stuck in it, as if somebody had stuck the key in the front door lock, tried to turn and get it out, and it got stuck, and in his haste, dropped the other key. So that's basically what the police decided, that, okay, there's 2 keys, they're freshly made copies, and what that means is there's a finite number of people who had access to these keys because, like I said, they were not supposed to be copied.
Now, in any investigation, homicide detectives some experienced, some more experienced, and some less experienced, will all have some kind of strategy to ascertain what really went on and who are the likely suspects and who can be arrested if there's enough evidence. What is their strategy what's the police strategy? What's their initial idea, and how do they go about with a strategy to try to get a confession or a conviction?
Well, when you have a small department, and I'm seeing this in other departments as well, in other smaller communities. I live here in San Diego, and that's a big community. It's the 8th largest city in the nation. Newport Beach is a much smaller place. So what's different about a small police department versus a big city police department is they have people on their force, and in Newport they rotate their detectives. So you don't have somebody who's, a veteran homicide detective working every case. They rotate them so that the detective in this case was Tom Voss, and this was his first homicide case, and actually, as it turns out, it was his first and only homicide case. He had worked undercover narcotics. He had done all kinds of other things, but this was his first homicide case. Now, by the same token, as he's explained to me, that doesn't mean he was making decisions on this case. It meant that he was the lead detective, but he said he mostly was in charge of keeping the paperwork together, and that the people above him were the ones who were making the decisions on what to do next, which I think is also true of smaller departments where you have the supervisory people who are more experienced, who are calling the shots and telling everybody what to do. So I think when they say lead detective in this particular case, I don't want to blame him for overlooking on anything, but at the same time, he was inexperienced. So, but by the same token, he was also an enterprising guy. He was the one who said, hey, why don't I go approach some of these hardware stores and see if I can find out if anybody's made keys there recently. As it turned out, guess what? Eric Naposki had recently copied keys at the hardware store, near his house. So, like I said, so there are pros and cons to this smaller community approach and the experience, but that's the way it is. What it is, and it was what it was. I don't know if that
so how do they first? What do they first do? What is their first idea as a likely suspect or a possible suspect? What's their first idea, and how do they go about it?
Well, this is over some period of time, but initially, I think they kind of knew, well, this probably was an inside job because of the keys, right? Because there's a finite number of keys. So
Certainly.
They were searching. They were also searching for the murder weapon, and they went looking right in the channel of water right outside his house. Didn't find any gun or anything because there's no murder weapon. There were just the bullet casings. And they didn't really know what was going on or who to look at in particular until Bill's memorial service, at which Nanette's son said, my boyfriend plays football. My mom's boyfriend plays football. Now, people at the funeral were like, well, wait a minute. Nanette was Bill's girlfriend. Who's she talking about? So right away, cat's out of the bag. They focused in on somebody who plays football who is hanging out with Nanette. Now, Nanette has gone to stay at another house that Bill owns, which is about 4 minutes away on Seashore Drive. She says, I can't stay in this house where he was killed. So she's staying in this other house, which they call the beach house. And the police start surveilling her and that house. And within short order, they see Eric Naposki coming into the house. So they start following him, and they find probable cause to pull him over and bring him in for questioning in the middle of the night after he's gotten off work at the Thunderbird Lounge, some kind of outstanding traffic warrant. So they bring him in for questioning about this murder, and he's like, well, I've been kind of dating Nanette, but it's like no big deal. So he's minimizing their relationship, and she's minimizing their relationship. And So the police are kind of focusing in on the two of them as suspects, but they still don't have what they need to break this case open. So what they end up doing, and I ended up interviewing the prosecutor at that time, which was not the prosecutor who ultimately prosecuted this case to conviction. She was a tough cookie, and the way she described it, this was an all-man's kind of world. She was the only woman, and she just had a disagreement with these guys at the Newport Beach Police Department. There was a breakdown in communication. They didn't want her involved in the case. They wanted to do it their way. She wanted to do something different. They split the case into two, into the fraud with the checks, the embezzlement, and the murder. And she's like, she didn't think that was a good idea, but that's what they did. So they finally arrested Nanette for these fraudulent checks that they basically counted up like 15 checks that they could figure out that she forged Bill's name on. And they thought that they were going to force her to talk about the murder, but in fact, she just clammed up. And so the way she tells it now, looking back, that was a big mistake, and that is what really screwed up this whole case, and why it ended up turning into a cold case all these years later. She wouldn't talk, and they, I guess, thought she was just going to roll over, and she didn't. So they thought that Eric was the shooter, I think, way back then, but they just couldn't prove it.
Was there any explanation what they thought they were doing by separating those charges? Because it's a minor charge. They thought because the pressure of being in prison would then get her to. I still don't understand what they thought they would do by doing that.
Well, I think
that's very unusual.
One thing you need to understand is I can't say this with any certainty. I am only being told what I'm being told. It's all these years later. People's memories are faulty. There's a lot of politics involved in this, and people don't want to point fingers. The prosecution, the prosecutor and his investigator, they don't want to say anything bad about the police department. The police department's probably embarrassed after all these years. Ultimately, there was a conviction and it all turned out fine, but I can't say for sure what happened back then, but I think what happened is that they thought that they had a sure thing with the fraud, and that's what they could prove, and that's what they could prove in court, and so that's what they went after, and they were hoping that the murder would follow. That's all I can suggest at this point. It may not make sense, but I think that's what happened.
Yeah, but regardless, it goes cold. And I think one thing that you convey in the book, though, that Nanette's a pretty strong character. When her demeanor when she's being interviewed is very helpful instead of being defiant, and she doesn't really dig herself into too many holes, doesn't contradict herself. She pretty well has her story down.
As opposed to Naposki, who's the big argumentative, aggressive guy who just pisses them off, Yeah, she says, I'll be helpful. You can be passive aggressively not helpful and sort of appear like you're trying to do, to go along, but she wasn't volunteering anything, clearly. And she's a con woman. She had an answer for most things that they asked her. And she got away with it for 15 years.
Yeah. Now, what was it? We're running out of time, but what was it that was the turning point? Did they have any new evidence? What was it? What was the reason for, after that many years of being cold, it became suddenly prosecutable?
Yeah. There's an investigator named Larry Montgomery who was a former homicide detective at another police department. He went to work for the DA's office. And he also worked on the Skylar DeLeon case, and he did a good job with that, helped them bring that to conviction. And this was a similar case to that other one, meaning that it was a death penalty case originally, or it looked like it could be at least, meaning that the special circumstances of financial, murder for financial gain were there.
Right.
They did not prosecute this one as a death penalty case, but it was a very similar case in that it was a largely circumstantial evidence case because they did not have the murder weapon and they did not have direct evidence, but they had all kinds of other financial evidence and all kinds of other evidence. And so they were very similar in the way that the suspects and defendants used their children as pawns and manipulated, and it was all about money and greed. So he came into this one, the police detective and the prosecutor really got to be close over this during the Skylar DeLeon investigation, and they wanted to continue to work on something else, and they basically just said, hey, do you have any other cases that you think, we could take another look at? And they said, yeah, the McLaughlin case. So they set this investigator, Larry Montgomery, onto the case, and he went through every piece of evidence again. He listened to all these tapes that they had in the case files of phone calls that they'd made, phone interviews, and a bunch of taped calls that had come into the police department. And what he found were a couple witnesses who had basically been overlooked. And what also had changed is that, with new technology, the ballistics were much better, so that they were able to narrow down the murder weapon from 27 or 28 guns down to just one. And that was the Beretta 92F, which, coincidentally, Eric Naposki had owned and said had been stolen. And he didn't know where it was, couldn't find it, couldn't produce it. So they basically were able to arrest both of them, and they re-interviewed both of them. And Eric Naposki kept saying, I have an alibi. And he said this earlier, too, but he never produced any phone records to back this up. He said he got a page from the Thunderbird Lounge where he worked saying he needed to come in and warn him about some boat parade traffic, and he should be aware. And that he returned a page all those years ago when we used to have pagers. He apparently returned a page from a payphone using his credit card, his phone credit card. But he never produced those records, and so by the time he was arrested, those records had long been destroyed, and he and his attorneys and Nanette's attorneys kept trying to use that as, well, it's been so long you can't properly adjudicate or prosecute this case because, our evidence and our, Eric's alibi have been destroyed. Well, according to the prosecution, they did these time trials driving from point A to point B, and they're like, you know what, regardless of whether he ever made this call, he still had enough time to commit the murder, so it doesn't even matter. So there was a whole lot of, back and forth over this phone call that Eric Naposki supposedly made. His defense said it was physically impossible for him to have committed the murder because he returned this call at 8:52, and there's no way he could have driven from there to Newport, and the prosecution proved that he was able to do that to everybody's satisfaction, including the jury, including the judge. So,
how was it that the trials were split up, that he went first? And was there any indication that any of the defense attorneys wanted that?
Okay, you're asking me a question that I'm not exactly positive of. I think this was the prosecution's choice. But basically what happens is if you try two people like this together, you can't use their statements about each other against them. So it actually is better for probably everybody to separate defendants in trials like this. So it's not that often that you see a whole bunch of defendants tried together. It does happen, but it actually works better because, theoretically, the prosecution can then use completely different theories from trial to trial because you have different juries. With using the same facts, you can have different interpretations. So, that's kind of the point I was. That's the kind of point I was bringing up because the defense attorney kept insisting that it was Naposki alone. So that was it could have been to her advantage from him playing on that this guy's already been convicted and acted alone. So that was a bit of an advantage. From one trial, you have the defense saying one thing and the prosecution saying one thing. In the next trial, you have the prosecution saying what the defense said in the last trial against the other defendant. And so everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. And it's, you have different juries, so they don't know. But the judge did not keep out the information that Eric Naposki had already been convicted when Nanette finally came around for trial. But when Nanette came around for trial, Eric had already been convicted, and so what her defense was trying to say is, well, Eric's the one who shot him, and Nanette didn't have anything to do with it. In the first one, he was just jealous. And in the first one, they were his defense was trying to say, well, it could have just as easily have been Nanette who shot him. It was just kind of crazy.
Yeah. So,
but
justice
the bottom
prevailed,
line
obviously.
Of the defense for both of them were that it's been 15 years. This just isn't fair to prosecute them because we don't have all the evidence. It's been destroyed, which wasn't true, but that was what both of them said. And that the police investigation was so shoddy and so poor that, you can't trust anything they say.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have to make a defense, but obviously the jury concurred with the prosecution, so. Right.
Well, Matt Murphy, the prosecutor, he's a pretty amazing prosecutor. He's very convincing and very persuasive.
Yeah, so he did an admirable job, obviously.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What was the atmosphere like at the trial? There was a lot of spectators, and basically, how was the trial received, basically, by the media?
Well, I think people were really more interested in Nanette because Nanette is a woman, and it's more interesting when you have an attractive murderer these days in our culture, And this got to be a more high-profile trial because Eric Naposki was in the NFL, so that's sort of a celebrity status. Excuse me, but Nanette really was the story as far as I could tell, and as far as I think the media was concerned, they really felt like, she's just more interesting as a person. But they never really painted her during the trial, either trial, as a three-dimensional person. She was just like this horrible, terrible, sleazy, cheating, seductress. And even her own attorney, it was bizarre. He just kept bringing up all of this horrible behavior. But he said, but no matter how much you hate her, you can't convict her just because you don't like who she is. That doesn't make her a murderer. And I'm not sure that was the best tactic because by the time you were done, he made her look worse than the prosecutor did. It was kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I know what point he was trying to make, but you're right. He went on and on and on. It was like, wow, that's you've convinced them. Yeah, you have.
Right. And so the thing was, the other thing that we didn't quite get to, and I know we have like 2 seconds left, but the interesting thing at the very end was that Eric Naposki, after he was convicted, then comes out with this story about, it wasn't me. It was a hitman that Nanette hired, which delayed everything and sentencings and had the prosecutor and Larry Montgomery, the investigator, go back again and try to research this whole new theory, but it never held any water, and they were both sentenced.
Absolutely. Yeah, so they're both sentenced to life without any possibility of parole, no death penalty, but secured away, both of them.
And
so
her first appeal has already been denied, so there you go.
Yeah. Well, there has to be something wrong with the trial anyway, but there's been some surprising appeals though, so I shouldn't say anything. Anything can happen. Yeah.
She was the deliberations in her case were pretty quick. So
it was an amazing experience attending the trial. Obviously.
It was interesting to me to go and interview Eric Naposki. The trials are trials, and I could not believe all the stuff that she had done to people. I was amazed at that. And the fact that she had no emotion whatsoever, ever. She just sat there like a stone.
Wow.
It's like, wow, do you have a heart? Like I said, she has a deep, dark hole in her soul, that woman.
When you interviewed Naposki, was he still in denial, or what? And was there any talk of him being manipulated?
Oh no, he admitted. She took me. she's a liar. You know, I believed her at the time. I loved her at the time. You know, but he also was like, you know, I'm innocent. I didn't do this. You know, there was a hitman. You know, I talked to him for almost 7 hours, and I could barely get a word in edgewise. He really liked to talk, and that was how he was with the with the detectives as well. You know, they were trying to ask him questions, and he just kept taking over. So I let him do that, and I said, look, I'm going to let you talk, but I need to talk too. I need to ask some questions, and so he did let me. But he was a character. And you know what? The thing that I always say is people who are convicted killers, they don't seem like killers. They're charming. They are friendly oftentimes. They are, you know, you would have no idea. And he fit right into that mold. So.
Yeah, well, that's the scary part of the capacity, too.
I
you
know.
That you say, geez, I almost could be friends with this person. Almost.
He almost had me convinced. I almost had him going, wow, that was a story. So I said, well, okay, I need to just go research this. So I did, you know, and I was like, and I started looking at the evidence, and I started looking at the stuff that he said, and it just didn't hold together. So. Yeah,
well, that's the thing. Yeah, that's amazing that you had that opportunity to listen to his story first then.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I always have, you know what, I go into these things I try to go in with an open mind. I don't just immediately dismiss anybody, even if they've been convicted, because, you know, there are sometimes wrong convictions, and I'm willing to take a look, and, you know, I'm trained as an objective journalist, so I do approach these cases that way. Even though people have already been convicted, I do approach it that way, and then I write the story the way I write the story, and people, I mean, I don't write a book unless somebody's been convicted, so I wait until everything's over.
Yeah, that's a pretty safe bet these days, because there's been a few books where I was surprised where a publishing company actually said, okay, we're going to publish this story before the outcome of a trial. And
that happens all the time. All the time.
They're getting it wrong. They're getting it wrong, though, you know, so surprising jury results, so it can happen.
Yep.
And appeals, too, so.
I never do that. I always wait till there's a conviction. So.
I'm pretty happy with the conviction. Like in Canada here, you're originally from Canada, I believe, Montreal. They try to, you know, I don't know, some people are hesitant to write before the appeal is finished, which is another year, year and a half or so.
No, you'd be waiting forever for that.
Well, you're already waiting forever, as you know, so another year and a half is not. And, you know, and I mean, especially if you've looked at the trial and you're experienced at looking at trials, and no one can ever say for sure that something won't be overturned in appeal, but unless something was dramatically wrong with the trial, and so...
Well, you know, my first book, Poisoned Love, with Kristen Rossum, she's gone through the appeals process. Her appeal was rejected in the state courts. Her appeal was rejected in the federal courts. Her appeal was rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court. She still found an attorney to take another whack and coming in a side door, and is still going at it. I mean, and her trial was 2002, and we're in 2014. She's still trying to get free. So, you know. Yeah,
there's some people that keep trying. Some people can keep using the system. Yeah, certainly.
Right.
Yeah, and there's been some outcomes, so it's worth a shot, I guess, if you got nothing better to do and you're sitting there anyway.
Absolutely. Why not, right? It's not your money. It's somebody else's money. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes the taxpayer feel good that's listening right now. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for this. You have something coming down the pike? What's the next project, if you could be so kind as to give us some glimpse?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a case. This is kind of interesting, that also came out of Dead Reckoning, the Skylar DeLeon case. Tom and Jackie Hawks, who were the victims in that case, and tied to an anchor and thrown overboard right off Newport Beach, which is why the Newport Beach Department was investigating that. They originally met in a town called Prescott. Actually, it's pronounced Prescott, like biscuit. Prescott, Arizona. And I am now writing a book about a murder case out of Prescott, Arizona. So somebody who had read that Dead Reckoning was sending me story ideas and book ideas, and the first one I'm like, no. And then she tried again, and she was sending me these clippings from the newspaper from the trial of Stephen DeMacher, who was ultimately convicted and sentenced for killing his just recently divorced wife, Carol Kennedy. And the interesting thing about this case is that they have 2 daughters, and the 2 daughters to this day believe that their father did not do it and that their father was wrongly convicted, and so does his entire family. So this is a really interesting case to me because there were a lot of twists and turns, things that went wrong. There was a mistrial in the first trial, and he was ultimately convicted in a second trial. But there was, the murder occurred about a month after their divorce was finalized, and there had been a long battle over money. So it's another one of these cases about money and financial gain. And the prosecution basically says that his motive was so that he didn't have to pay her alimony. So the day that he was supposed to pay her his first alimony payment of $6,000, he didn't make the payment, and the next day she was murdered. So, and then there were 2 life insurance payments of $750,000 total that he was supposedly the beneficiary, but because they were divorced, they were then going to go to the daughters. And what ended up happening is that money, he convinced them that money needs to go to me in my defense. And so there were all these transfers. And so even after he was charged with the murder, he was later charged with a whole bunch of other things that happened while he was in jail with the transfer of all that money, which ended up getting spent on his first trial, which was a mistrial. So private attorneys got all that money. The daughters got none of it. That's gone. And there's just a whole bunch of other stuff that was just really crazy. And these attorneys were accusing each other of impropriety, and the judge, and it was just like, it's a crazy case. It's crazy.
Who needs fiction, right?
It's crazy. It's like crazier than fiction. I always pick cases that are crazier than fiction.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It makes for amazing storytelling, that's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, we look forward to that one. So, yeah, we'll be talking to you in the new year, or in this year, I should say. Knowing
next year. It'll be out in
next
2015.
Year?
Yeah, because I have to write it first. Give me some time to write it.
Well, I mean, I know you're prolific, so.
Yeah, we're not that fast.
Okay, good. Thank God.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Caitlin, for coming on and talking about I'll Take Care of You. Very fascinating book, and thank you for coming on for a fascinating interview. Well,
thank you once again for having me on, and I'm glad I was here.
Well, thank you, and have yourself a good night.
You too. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.